So I wanted to make a little backdrop for Necromunda, and today I'm going to show you just how I did it. It's really easy. Yeah. So to start with, I had some 1/2 inch thick, it's quite firm pink foam. It's really easy to work with. So I decided what I'd do is I would make some separate tiles so I could rearrange them and they could be fairly modular. So I started by measuring a 12 inch by 12 inch zone mortalis tile, and that would be the basis for these wall sections. I just made sure everything was flush, everything was kind of straight, and it was pretty easy just to make these cuts by tracing around one of the actual tiles. If you don't have one of these tiles, the squares are 2 inches by 2 inches and the tile itself is 12 inches by 12 inches. It's really easy to make up. Nice clean cuts all the way down until I hear the blade actually hit the cutting mat, so I know I'm not going to risk breaking anything and some bits are going to fall off or anything like that. Once again, it's really nice rigid foam to work with, so you shouldn't really have a problem with it. I will try and put a link in the description below. I actually got this from Amazon. It comes in a weird 6x3 sheet, I believe, but it's really good stuff, so I'll put the link in that for the description below. And yeah, once I've got my 12 inch piece and everything's nice and clean, off comes the excess, and we're left with a lovely 12 by 12 tile, which I think is going to be perfect as a backdrop for these Necromunda tiles. So what I'm doing here is I'm measuring the zone mortalis wall sections, because what I want is a little shelf, so this can have an element of playability, or I could display miniatures on it. So to make sure everything kind of sits nice and straight, I decided to do the height of a zone mortalis piece. All I do is put the piece against the foam, a couple of marks, and then using the straight edge from the zone mortalis tile, I just make a line across, and that's going to give me where my platform needs to be. So all I'm doing here is I'm going to cut some sections out. I use the width of the tile every single time to make sure everything's really consistent, because if I do end up making a few more of these, they can just butt up next to each other. I can flip them around, vice versa, and everything will kind of go together quite nicely. So the dimensions will always be the same and it will always be pretty consistent for what it is. Nice clean cuts again, and just making sure that everything's nice and straight, or as straight as it can be. So here I'm measuring the tile sections again. This is actually going to be for the section at the front. Now what I had to do here was minus the width of the foam. So I mark a zone mortalis tile, wall section, and then I come in with an odd bit of foam and I measure the thickness. Then I'll cut to that top line so I know to compensate for the overhang of the shelf section, which will give me a nice square kind of box to play around with. Same again, I just measure the tiles, make sure everything's nice and flat and flush, and yeah, mark a line and then double check it using the foam, making sure it sits flush on top, which I'm happy with. Then I can make the cut. It's easier to measure and measure again than to do one cut and maybe waste materials or create more work for yourself. It's always a case of working smarter, not harder. So all I'm doing is I'm just being really careful, and they always say measure twice, cut once. Same again, all I'm doing here is I'm marking out the sections. I actually marked out a 4-inch section here, but then decided that maybe was a bit too wide for what I had in mind. So although I measure 2 tile width there, I actually cut it down to 1.5 tiles, which is about 3 inches or 3.5 inches I think I went for in the end, just so that I could fit some bigger base things on there or some scenery pieces, just to make the it all look a bit more appealing. Same again, I'm just working really methodically, making sure my cuts are nice and clean and my lines are straight, and that I'm happy with everything before I commit to those cuts. So nice clean cuts again. I'm going to keep saying it because it is really important to kind of do measurement really when designing these types of things can be your best friend, and just having that little bit of patience can really go a long way to help not waste materials and things like that. Same again, this is just for the bottom section. I'm just carefully measuring everything out and making sure that everything is where it needs to be and that everything's going to fit nice and snug. As it's foam, I like everything to fit quite tightly together. I am going to use hot glue. My head's in the way there a little bit, so apologies. Which will dry quite hard, and I do reinforce everything with some bits on the side, but I do just want to make sure that everything is nice and snug for the main body of the piece, as that's where the bulk of work and playing will go. So you want it to be fairly robust. So now all the pieces are cut, we go over to our good friend hot glue and cocktail sticks, which is I guess a foam bottle builder's best friend. Here I actually have the shortest lead in the world on my hot glue gun, so I've had to bring everything onto the floor, make sure the gun's really nice and hot, take your time, line your cuts up, make sure it's nice and flush with that line. Then I come in just with the hot glue and I reinforce it with a bead along the bottom. This is just for a little bit of stability. I do it with the bottom piece as well, same type of principle. Then I glue the front piece on, and we're left with kind of like a plinth with a big backing. Then all I do is I cut down some cocktail sticks and I just carefully push them as far in as I can to the piece. These are just going to act like little pins just to hold everything together, and we'll add a lot more stability and a bit more durability for everything. If you can't get them in, don't worry. If they go off to one side, just pull them out again slightly. It's foam. You can just kind of wiggle it and then push it back in, and it will kind of give you quite a nice stable hold. You just got to be a bit firm with it. Remember, it is only foam. So all I do is I work my way around, just 3 pins in each section, through the back, through the bottom, through the front, until we're left with kind of something like that. All you do is you nip them down if they're sticking out a bit too much, but don't worry, because I'm going to come in with a bit of sandpaper. And all I do is here is I just work my way all the way around the piece, making sure I'm happy with everything, that there's no major imperfections. It doesn't really matter too much, it's Necromunda, it's going to get busted up. But I do just want to make sure that any slight overhangs we've got foam or anything like that, this sands down really easily. So if you are a little bit out on measurements, don't worry too much. And all I do is I just keep working my way all the way around the piece until I'm happy. Then I come in with what we call ready-made filler. For our American friends, it's spackle. I've added a little bit of PVA to this, and occasionally I've added bits of paint as well for different projects, but I just come in with my finger all the way along, making sure that I've sealed up any big gaps that maybe I don't want to see. I think that the paint will cover a lot of it, but I think this is just, it's a nice way of finishing a piece off and just pushing it that little extra mile. Once everything's dried, I do help it along with some sandpaper just to kind of get off any excess that doesn't need to be there. It smooths everything over, and it'll just give it a really nice smooth finish. And then just a drying time, I've got a little hairdryer. This was about £12 from Asda's. I just come in and just gently go over it all, keeping the heat kind of far away, but in little blasts. Now I had these little sections, I think they came off one of my kids', it was like a TP thing that joined the two dowels together. So we chucked it and I kept these bits. So out comes the hot glue for some pipe sections. And all I do is I just stick them in. They're quite a thick plastic, these. So in a way, I'm quite happy I went with this, because it adds a bit of weight to the actual piece, which I think it really needed. So same again, trusty hot glue, just come in, make sure it's got a good hold on it before you move on to the next step. Then obviously pipes do need somewhere to go, they can't just go into thin air. So I decided to make a small little section where maybe a gunner or just someone on a 25mm base could kind of sit and perch and snipe someone and just be a bit of a nuisance. So I cut 3 little sections of just, I think about an inch foam that I cut into 3 strips to build up. Lots of hot glue, making sure each piece is dry before I move on to the next. Doesn't really matter if these are out of line, because I will sand them down to make them look a little bit ruined and a little bit kind of messed up later on. But once again, just working through all the little pieces, making sure that I was happy with, I guess, the composition of the piece. Then obviously it's time for some Necromunda bits. I had these cool pipe sections that I clipped off the pins. All I wanted to do was make sure that this sat as flush as possible to the back wall. It's only a little bit of visual interest. It doesn't need to be a massive playable piece. I might do another one next time. But I just decided that it needed a little bit of something. So I thought just there would be kind of cool. On the wall at the back, I'll probably do some stencil work. There'll be lots of posters. So although there is a fair bit of space there, I don't think it's going to be as noticeable. Hot glued it down. Then all I do is I come in again with some filler, and I just try and any little lines or gaps, I just push it right up against the piece, making sure to work the filler into any gaps so that you can't really see anything. I think that hole was really annoying me, so I decided to fill that. And then, yeah, we're left with something like that. Any excess filler, a really, really wet brush, you can just wash it over the filler and it will kind of move it off of the plastic pieces. So now is for a bit of visual interest. So with a ruler and the back of a paintbrush, I decided to come in and try and make some kind of like tile sections to make it look like, you know, these were slabs, and it's going to be a lot of concrete, but I feel that this will probably just help break up the bigger sections. And all I do is I work my way around the actual base section and just keep scoring until I'm happy. I always go with less is more, but I ended up with something like that, which I thought was quite nice. Then all it is a hobby knife, and a good way of making these tile sections feel like they are separate slabs is I do little chips towards the edge of one, but leave the other section straight, just to make it look like one section had been broken and chipped, but the other was still intact. It just helps sell the idea a little bit, I feel. Foam isn't always my first choice of materials, but it is really versatile, and you can do some really, really cool things with it, which I'm going to show you now. Carry on with the hobby knife, just working around till I was happy with the amount of damage. I cut into it a little bit, and then out comes a rolled up ball of foil. And all I do is, without any rhyme or reason, I just kind of really work the ball all the way around all the sections, and this gives a great kind of pitted, broken, concrete type look to it. It's so easy to do, and all I do is I just go ham on it. I work all myself all the way around the edges to make it look chipped and old and dirty. I do the front bit, same again. I just, you know, and don't think about it. I just, wherever I see a space, I just start rolling this ball just in little sections, and there we go. It starts to work its magic, and it really is such a cool trick to do. You can do some really, really good effects with stuff like this. Same again on the front. I just work all the way around, just making sure that I'm happy with the effect and how much is there. Once again, you can always add more later. So if it gets to a point where you think that's all right, stop, step back, have a look at it, and make sure it's it's where you want it to be. And if it's not, get your trusty ball of foil again and just go at it. So all I do is I carry on working my way around the model, and until I feel that I'm happy with it and that I've adequately roughed it up enough for the underhive. And there it is. As you can see, I've kind of gone back to it a few times. I've jabbed it with the end of a pencil. I'm really happy with how that's looking, and I think it's going to take some paint really, really well when I get around to painting it. So next, I start to work on the top section. Same type of principle. I come in with my ball of foil and I just go absolute ham on it. I roll it around. I really push it in some sections to make it look like gunfire, and this big slab has crumbled over time. Just trying to fit the aesthetic with what I have in mind for my little section of Necromunda. And I just keep going all the way around. I come back, I work some more, I go back to sections, same again. And you're left with this. I think it looks really, really cool. I did come in with some more lines, and I can't wait to get some paint on this, which I'm going to do in the next video. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for sticking around. If you've got any tips and tricks to work with foam, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Take care.